this was most favorable character to live in this country doing agriculture. Movement was started. The Rockefeller Education Board stated, in our dreams, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. It goes on, it says, the present education conventions fade from their minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. Notice the founders and those who funded and created public education in America are moving to urbanization, industrialization. We want factory workers, and these rural folk and their old traditional ways, we're going to have to teach them a thing or two. We will, in our dreams, this is the best ideal, they yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. Does that sound like the book Education, where it says that the youth should become thinkers, not mere reflectors of other men's thoughts? No, they will yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands was the program. The rural to the urban movement playing a key part in that. He goes on and says, we shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We have not to raise up from among them authors, editors, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have an ample supply. That's kind of, that quotation floored me the first time I read it as a teacher, because I'm going, whoa, this is not going to be helpful at all. And all that the Rockefeller Education Board in 1913 was doing was they were taking a page out of the Jesuit playbook, if you will, the Society of Jesus in the 1500s, as the counter-Reformation. They were countering what the Reformation had accomplished. And they said, how do we do it? How do we shut down all of this study of the Bible and people thinking and coming to a knowledge of the truth and the righteousness by faith through the Word of God and the Bible alone? How do we come against this? Well, they said, here's how we do it. We're going to start an education system. And Bertrand Russell, the secular writer, the historian, writes about this movement. He says, the Jesuits provided one sort of education for the boys who were to become ordinary men of the world, and another for those who were to become the members of the Society of Jesus. Ordinary men and women will be expected to be docile. There's that word again. That word means compliant. It means malleable. It means not strong and independent and noble-minded with the biblical foundation. It means going with the winds of change and the shifting sands of human opinion. That's docile. We're going to help them to be docile, industrious, punctual. Now, I can buy into that. Industrious and punctual. We want to have more of that. That's a good thing. But then notice this. Thoughtless and contented with your lot in life. We will put them in this position of subserviency, thoughtlessness, docility. That was the mindset of the Jesuit education system of the 1500s. That American public schooling that you heard about from the Rockefeller Institute was borrowing from. Now, fast forward from the 1500s to the 1800s, and this is a statement from Johann Gottlieb Fichte in his address to the German nation. The Prussians had been defeated by Napoleon's army, and they wanted to have, once again, a proud and strong people. The Prussian nation will be the most well-drilled soldiers, the most compliant, machine-like industrial workers, and we will make this system the strongest across Europe. So here's what Johann Gottlieb Fichte, one of the philosophers of German education, Prussian schooling is what it was called. He said, education should provide the means to destroy free will. That was the goal of so-called education. We would call that the opposite of education. He says, if you want to influence the student at all, you must do more than merely talk to him. You must fashion him, and fashion him in such a way that he simply cannot will otherwise than what you wish him to will. This came to America in the year 1844, interestingly enough. It was the founder of modern public schooling in America, Horace Mann, and there was a lot of altruism at this time, a lot of desire to help, but it was borrowing from the Prussian playbook, taking a page right out of their system. Horace Mann visited the Prussian schools, came back in 1844, and issued his second annual report to the Boston, Massachusetts School Committee and said, we must adopt this system here. what they've done over there in Prussia. It'll be great. Compulsory schooling, where every child from a very early age comes into the public sector and is raised by community experts. We could go on with the destruction of the family and the utopian post-millennial worldview and theology of this. Time does not suffice. It's all on the DVD set called Schooled. But Horace Mann was the guy at the origins of this. Then you fast forward to William Torrey Harris in 1906, and you'll understand why God's picture is so beautiful when you contrast it with what the world has been up to. 99 students, he said, out of 100 are automata. That would be automatons. So we are literally creating robots, docility, thoughtlessness. They will yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. These rural folk will come on in and we'll give them a good schooling. 99 students, he says, out of 100 are automata, careful to walk in prescribed paths, careful to follow the prescribed custom. This is not an accident, but the result of substantial, what he calls education, which, scientifically defined, is the subsumption of the individual. Did you catch that? To subsume. If you don't know that word subsumption, that's okay. Microsoft Office doesn't know that word either. It's got a little red line under it. Subsumption, to subsume, means to, let me use an example. It's as if you take a little piece of dough, and then here's a giant lump of dough, where everything is sameness, and there's a uniqueness perhaps to this piece, but you take it and you just stuff it in there, and you meld it in, and it becomes merged into the collective. The individuality is subsumed into the greater whole. In other words, children's individuality will be annihilated from them according to this design. And he said 99 out of 100. 99 out of 100, they've had great success. So continuing on with the findings on this, modern research has found that he was almost exactly right with his numbers. In a study on divergent thinking, they found that 98% of children aged 3 to 5 scored as what would qualify as creative genius, what they call divergent thinking. The ability to think independently, think creatively, think outside of the human man-made boxes. Now, by the way, we should be very careful with this because the hippie Luciferian mindset out there likes to share these very same facts because they go, yes, free yourself from all bonds, including religion and God and the Bible. No. That is the other pitfall on the other side of this balance beam, right? God's methods of true education are beautiful and true because they affirm individuality. They affirm creativity because we are image bearers of God, but we are not God, right? So the other mindset says, well, the do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. You do whatever you want to do, and you have taken the position of God. That's one error. Over on this side, the error is you will be an automaton, an unthinking being. Your humanity will be degraded and wasted away. But notice here, 98% of children aged 3 to 5 have this gift. We're all given this gift. We've been given a power akin to that of the Creator, the power to think and to do. And it is the work of true education to develop this power in the young so that they would be thinkers, not mere reflectors of other men's thoughts. Watch what happens with the worldly schooling methods, though. After 5 years of schooling, they retested the same children, and only 32% still had that same ability to think divergently, creatively. After 5 more years of school, only 10%, and by age 25, only 2% of the population remain as divergent thinkers. Is that not sad and tragic? So that would be 98%. 98 students out of 100 are automatons, careful to walk in the prescribed paths and to follow the prescribed custom. This is not an accident, but the result of substantial education, which, scientifically defined, is the subsumption of the individual. 98 out of 100 according to the research. William Torrey Harris said 99 out of 100. He was pretty close, wasn't he? Harold Rugg, in his 1933 book, The Great Technology, talked about this futuristic world that was coming, which we are living in now. And he said, we're going to have the scientific reconstruction of our social order, a whole new society, social engineers building it from the top down. He said, a new public mind is to be created. Singular, one mind. Notice the collective, what Edward Bernays called the group mind that is controlled by the powers that be. He says a new public mind is to be created. How? Only by creating tens of millions of individual minds and welding them into a new social mind. Through the schools of the world, we shall disseminate a new conception of government, one that will embrace all the activities of men. one that will postulate the need of scientific control. So a totally controlled totalitarian environment where you read about things in Revelation 13, like legislating people's conscience in matters of religious liberty, stripping away every principle of a free and republic under our Constitution in the United States of America. This dystopic future is coming, and it's built in large part by the forming of the minds of the population into what they call the group mind, the social mind, which can then be carried off as the whole world wanders after the beast. Bertrand Russell put it this way. He said, "It is to be expected that advances in physiology and psychology will give governments much more control over individual mentality than they now have, even in totalitarian countries." So if we can do the mind control program right, then we will have greater control over the people even than, say, a communist country or another authoritarian country. Fichte laid it down that education should aim at destroying free will so that after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise as their schoolmasters would have wished. Diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from, notice this, a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Isn't that a dystopic vision of the future? And you know why we have such strong statements from Spirit of Prophecy, like Fundamentals of Christian Education 470? I beg of parents to place their children where they will not be bewitched by a false education. You understand this is not merely a human agenda of social engineers and their totalitarian plans. No, this is a satanic agenda of the devil. Bewitching, a spiritual term. I beg of parents to place their children where they will not be bewitched by a false education. Their only safety, and this is really the thing to celebrate, their only safety is in learning of Christ. He is the great central light of the world. All other lights, all other wisdom are foolishness. Can I get an amen? Jesus is that great central light of the world. And when we drive our children and invite our children and all of us of all ages into living life God's way, all of a sudden light starts to beam in and we start to experience the word of truth in ways we never thought possible. I'm speaking from a bit of a testimony on that, having come from this worldly way, having grown up and taught in the schools of the world, and then also having been immersed in, media. We got to talk about that issue as well, because this is another pitfall that is driving us away from that blueprint. Understanding the problems here will give us an even greater appreciation of the solution. George Barna said, "Media exposure has become America's most widespread and serious addiction." Now, you want to know some of the numbers on that, like how bad is it, Mr. Barna? Well, he said, first of all, the majority of people qualify as having an addiction to media. But if you look at the statistics, 96.6% now of toddlers and preschoolers use mobile devices. Kids aged 2 to 5 now spend more than 32 hours a week on average in front of a TV screen. Kids aged 8 to 18 are spending 5 hours a day watching TV and movies and 2.5 hours of worldly music on top of that, or 6 hours according to some studies if you do multitasking. Total screen time for the average American child is over 53 hours per week. That's nearly 8 hours a day. Teens now consume 9 hours of entertainment media per day. The American Academy of Pediatrics recently came out and discussing these things, and they said, we used to say children under 2 should not have any media at all, but now we're realizing, this was just last year, they said screen time is just becoming merely time. We don't even need to make a distinction anymore between regular time and screen time. They're being fused as one and the same. It's a clever way of them saying, basically, we are now so immersed in media 24/7 that qualifying time as the number of hours is almost an irrelevant concept because screen time itself is time for certain sectors of the population. And they said, so what we've done is we realized 96.6% of the toddlers and preschoolers are now using mobile devices, so we've readjusted our recommendations, and we no longer recommend, they say, American Academy of Pediatrics says we no longer recommend zero screen time because they're doing it anyway, and we're going to become irrelevant. Is that a lack of principle there, or what? I mean, when we look at what is best for child development, we want to go based on what is best, not what the culture is telling us. But nonetheless, 9 hours a day. Now, we can really get, just like alarmed over the teen use of media. But the latest numbers that came out is parents are spending nearly 8 hours a day on entertainment media. A total of 9 hours and 22 minutes of total media use, only 90 minutes of which is for work. So that would be nearly 8 hours a day. Parents, so 9 hours a day. Teens, and by the way, there's academic media on top of that, and we could talk about the fallacies of that and how doing all your reading and screen-based is altering the way that the brain thinks and interacts with the text, and it diminishes critical thinking and deep analysis. We'll leave that for another time. But the rest of the statistics, the average young person racks up 10,000 hours of video gaming by the age of 21. That's average. There are 5 million gamers in the United States who are spending more than 40 hours a week. You get the idea. This is a pretty major, all-consuming behemoth in the lives of most people. But then you look at this one. 3/4 of UK children spend less time outdoors than prison inmates. So we have erected a virtual prison now, if you will, where we're immersed in this media so continually that we have less privilege of outdoor sunshine and birds and gardens and clouds and trees than prison inmates. That's amazing. Now, if a picture speaks 1,000 words, for those listening on audio, it's a baby in a bouncy seat with the iPad attachment. This is not satire. This is the real thing. The average child will spend more time watching TV by the age of 6 than he will spend in conversation with his father in his entire life. My friends, is this the training that will produce strong men? Is this most favorable for our development? Is this devising of men an improvement upon God's plan? No, you heard the quotes earlier. God's methods of country living life as a family, doing agriculture, laboring together. That picture of life is God's ideal, and no devising of man has ever improved upon it. This is not of God. It's not even of man. Of course, it's of the enemy. Children now, not learning to do much practical anything, children learn to tie shoelaces later than ever before. Today's children may be whiz kids at high-tech gadgets, but they now learn to tie their shoelaces at a later age than ever before, a new report has found, even as late as 9 to 10 years old. So some of the basic aspects of child development not coming in till much later. In the UK, almost 1/3 of the children starting school are lacking social skills, having speech problems, or not toilet trained. The survey of senior primary school staff has found. Now, granted, they're starting school way too early, but usually a 4 or 5-year-old, you kind of got that handled. Little mishap here and there, but you're toilet trained. But one head teacher said, there is limited parent-child interaction. 4-year-olds know how to swipe a phone, but haven't a clue about conversations. Another primary school leader warned, we are having more and more children entering our early years stage with delayed speech. The State of Education report found 4/5 of teachers were worried about poor social skills or children having speech problems. More than 2/3 have seen children lacking self-help skills. Is this not tragic and sad? You understand the theme. What God created as the human being is starting to fade. It's starting to waste away. We're a far cry of what we once were. And there's been the natural degradation of the human species, if you will, for 6,000 years. But now we add to it all of this, and it's accelerating the pace of the decline of our race. Now, speaking of accelerating the decline, I started doing Media on the Brain seminars in 2012. 4 years later would be 2016, just last year. Well, a recent report from the Vision Council found that in 2012, 1/3 of Americans would be looking at a screen for over 5 hours a day. That's alarming, that's scary, that's crazy, right? But fast forward 4 years. In 2012, 1/3 of people looking at a screen for 5 hours a day or more. 2016, 60% of people looking at a screen for 5 hours a day or more. That's almost a doubling in the number of people that are in that category in only 4 years. So that's an acceleration, is it not? We are now tapping and swiping and touching our phones on average 2.42 hours per day. We're on our smartphones in some way 4.7 hours per day. They did a study of 44 families with toddlers, with 3 to 5-year-olds, with young kids, and they found all of them had their kids on mobile devices of some kind, using iPads, etc., playing games, video games, and whatnot. And the majority of the parents interacted with their children 0 during those times of media use. So what the experts are warning about is a number of things, some of it physiological, right? I mean, when you go away from the Garden of Eden model into this, and you're living like this on your phone all the time, what the chiropractors and the physical therapists and the other pediatricians are worried about children's spinal development and how they've got that hyperkyphosis is what they call it, a curvature at the upper spine and at the base of the neck, because we're always like this. You read about that in Spirit of Prophecy, being hunched over your work, right? We're even more so today because we're always on our phones like this. In fact, in certain municipalities in Germany and in Australia, they found so many people so glued to their phones in this manner that they were starting to walk off the curb into traffic. And this became a problem, enough of these incidents, that they said, all right, in our city, we're moving the stoplights from being up here at eye level to down at curb level, because that's where we live now. Like, this is our new world. Do we have a generation who doesn't know what clouds look like? I don't know. It's almost this futuristic world is upon us, where we're just down here. They have to move the stoplights. One guy in San Diego walked off a cliff when he was on his phone, and he died on Christmas Day 2 years ago. That was very, very sad, of course. But there's minor injuries as well. You're laying on your back, and you drop the phone on your face. They're saying there's an 84%, I couldn't believe what I was reading, 84% increase in cell phone-related injuries. I didn't know there were cell phone-related injuries. You chip your tooth or something, I guess, or walk into something. Now, when we're shaped like this more and more, have you ever seen that silly evolution chart that supposedly proves that we evolved from monkeys, right? First, the monkey's down here like this, and then he's kind of like up like this, and then like Neanderthal kind of up here, and then we have finally achieved Homo erectus, right? Homo sapien. We are standing erect, but we're going to have to update that chart now, because now we're shaped like this more and more, and we're in this posture more and more. We have to have another picture added to the chart for the supposed evolution that we have. Of course, that's not true, but in a recent survey, internet connection outranks hot water and daylight in the things millennials value most for quality of life. I could go without ever seeing the sun or being outdoors ever, but I could not go without a good internet connection. I could take cold showers for the rest of my life, but I could not go without internet connection. I couldn't believe the daylight part. Isn't that applicable to our conference here today? Whew, man. Now, I don't know where we've gotten when you get the iPotty for iPad. The most basic of human developmental stages for little children learning how to use the bathroom. You got the potty with the iPad attachment. Nothing can be without the tech invasion, can it? In fact, if parents are on their devices for 8 hours a day, who's talking to the kids? Who's telling them stories? The preschool teacher and their 25 little ones running around needing hugs constantly and help? No, we don't have enough personnel because all the busy. Feds spend nearly $500,000 for robots to tell preschoolers stories. Is that not a sign of where we have come? When we need to have social robots, they call it, not just for the kids, but even for the elderly. AI robot friend launched to chat and play games with lonely elderly. That just breaks my heart, that we don't have enough time to be human, right? So since people are so lonely, we've got the most socially connected generation in history. We've got 1,000 friends on Facebook, but depression and anxiety and loneliness and isolation are through the roof. All the studies are showing it. So you start to see weird phenomenon like the cuddling with strangers craze. I'm not making this up. This is where people have apps where you can go and hook up with, like platonic relationships to just have somebody to cuddle with. They have cafes, cuddle parties, and even professional cuddlers who hire out their services to somebody who just needs a hug. Or if that weirds you out a little bit, you can buy this chair. Lonely? This chair will hug you back. South Korean inventors, one of the most just tech, immersed societies in the world, South Korea, a chair that makes you feel a little loved. But then the devices themselves can become beloved by us. This is Martin Lindstrom of Apple, and he was the neuromarketing expert at Apple. And he said what happens is you have a very specific relationship with your phone. What we learned from a very recent study we did was that there were actually 2 activations happening for people who are in love with their iPhones. Did you hear what I said? In love. Because we actually realized from the study that the same area of the brain that is activated when you are in love with someone is activated when you are in love with your iPhone. Let that sink in a moment. Are we losing what it means to be human? There's a reason this is called How to Be Human Again. Because we've lost what God designed us for. We're now in love with our iPhone. Neurologically, literally, the circuits for loving your family member, your mother, your wife, your son, etc. That's what's firing off when you're thinking about your phone. Now, if that wasn't weird enough, study finds lonely people start to humanize their tech gadgets. Like literally, not just unknowingly having these love circuits firing off, but they start to personify their devices, humanize them. Then the Daily Mail reported this one: would you marry a robot? Artificial intelligence will allow people to find lasting love with machines, expert claims. They say with AI becoming much more humanoid-ish, we can then have love relationships. Would you date a robot? 1 in 4 in a survey. 1 in 4 people says that they would just date a robot and just give up on this human thing. I'm just going to go out with a robot. We'll have a good time. As long as it looks human, they said. 1 in 4 people in that survey, young adults, would date a robot. So then it got really, really, really sad with Dr. Keith Ablow's report, which I think is so spot on, because when we start to lose touch human to God, and us with our environment and nature, and we become part of this virtual prison in this isolated place where our main social outlet is social media, what happens? What he wrote was this. He says, for some time now, he's a psychologist, I have noted that young people are disconnected from the reality of their own existences. Facebook, Twitter, Tinder, and the like have made them think of themselves as mini reality TV versions of themselves. Too many of them see their lives as a series of flickering photos or quick videos. They need constant doses of admiration and constant confirmation of their tenuous existence, which comes in the form of Facebook likes and Twitter retweets. This substitution of media for real meaning has not only been shown to weaken their self-esteem and their ability to sustain themselves through adversity, but it can cheapen the value they assign to life in general, including their own lives. If all the world is a stage of pixels, and young people see themselves as their tweets and Snapchat photos, then taking a fistful of pills could seem like no more than the equivalent of shutting down a Facebook account or turning off an iPhone. Does that not make your heart break to think about this lost and lonely generation? So connected like never before, but so isolated and lonely like never before. But then there's the human labor aspect of it. This is so much part of what it means to be human. When God said, Adam, get busy, tend the garden, keep it, name the animals, etc. The Bible says, if any would not work, neither should he eat. But they're starting to ask the questions in the modern economics circles, will humans need to work for a living in the near future? You see, Domino's Pizza, Pizza Hut, others are starting to deliver pizzas by robot. And you've heard about the automation, the AI technology, the robots that can do so much of what human labor used to do. And you've probably heard about this for decades. Well, we're starting to live in that world that has been warned about. This robot is a better gardener than you, Washington Post reported. Oh, well, isn't that appropriate for our setting here? They say over half of the jobs in general will be automated in the next couple of decades if time would last that long. And this is not humans using tools. I'm all about labor-saving devices. I love that. I think we all can appreciate the value of modern technology. But there comes a point where this is not humans using tools, using to increase our productivity. No, this is the machines themselves doing the work completely, human labor becoming increasingly irrelevant. And so new economics theories are arising. Universal basic income. If you haven't heard about this yet, you will very soon because it's starting to gain majorly in trendy circles. Finland is experimenting with it already, where a portion of the population is simply given a living paycheck, a amount of money to live on. And you can choose to have a job or not. It would be a universal, sufficiently funded welfare system where you got these mega AI robotics corporations that now the work is all being done by robotic elements. Well, what are the people going to do? Well, we'll just heavily tax that aspect and give the people enough to live on. Just everybody. It's not just the needy. Universal. Everybody gets a basic income is what they're starting in Finland, and the discussions are spreading all over the West. Because after all, human labor is becoming increasingly irrelevant, they're saying. And so we'll all just play video games all day and collect that paycheck. Maybe we'll all just sit on our phones and social media, become entertained, and become less and less human. Google robot, the end of manual labor, CNBC reported. Commenting on this, the experts say it's super eerie. In 10 years, I would add, if time would last, in 10 years, the idea is going to be, would you let this robot put your kids to bed? Would you let it change your kid's diaper? That's how fast this is going to advance. It's picking up packages right now. These things are going to be walking down the street 10 to 15 years from now, delivering pizzas. It's already happening, actually, in certain places in the world. They're going to be in your office moving packages around. But did you notice the part about even caregiving of children? That could be roboticized. You understand the name of the session a little bit better now after seeing that. How to be human again. God wants to restore in our experience His original design. We're going to look at that in just a moment, but finishing up the media portion, do you know the name Ray Kurzweil? He's a famed futurist and tech expert, secular guy. He says by the 2030s, human brains will literally be able to connect to the cloud, to the internet, allowing us to send emails and photos directly to the brain to back up our thoughts, our memories. They're talking about literal, actual infusions of nano